Hi. I was just reading some of the email posts about aches and pains that people are experiencing in the hips. Um, so I just wanted to talk about that from a movement standpoint and how you might get some relief. um, so Ellen was suggesting the Epsom salt baths, and that's a great place to start. Is getting into the tub, into water. In yoga, for example, the second chakra is the water element, and that's related to the hips, related to the reproductive areas. So if you can really use the image of water or have the experience of water, that can be really helpful for the hips, especially this time of year when things are getting really dry and maybe your nerves are feeling a little bit frayed from the cold or the wind. Thinking about warm, soothing water and the Epsom salts, having that element of the salts is really helpful too, because that creates a little more buoyancy and viscosity to the water. So the hips, what you may be experiencing from the cleanse is that the gut, you're losing some of the inflammation and maybe you're losing some of the stuff, especially if you're doing colonics or having the laxatives like the magnesium citrate or even aloe. Things might be flushing out. So that's going to actually give room to the muscles that run through the gut. So one in particular is the psoas. And the psoas is a major hip flexor, so it's responsible for bringing the knee towards the chest, for example. But it also has many other jobs, one of which is to keep you from folding completely backward or completely forward. It helps keep you upright. And it attaches to the last rib at that vertebra, and then runs through the butt, through the torso, where the gut is, into the pelvis, and then it attaches to another muscle there, and then they part ways when they come out of the bottom of the pelvis, and the psoas attaches. Actually, if you feel this big knob where the thigh comes into the hip, that's where it attaches on the inside of that bony protrusion. So when that muscle gets tight, it bunches up. Or if there's a lot of stuff around it, it can get jammed in one direction or another. So when your gut releases, when there's not as much inflammation there, and the psoas has lots of room, so it may be trying to adjust for all that room that it has. So that might be some of why you might feel some aches and pains in the hip, or that sense of shifting, things moving around. It could be literally happening. So I'll show you a couple things that can be useful for relieving the psoas and also getting more fluidity in the hips, a little more softness and relaxation. So I'll start with the psoas. So one great thing that you can do for that is this visualization exercise. So your feet are flat on the floor, knees are bent. Just let your shoulders soften. You can also think of yourself as a big pile of newspaper. And newspaper gets wet. And as it gets wet, it starts to soften and collapse, flatten. So let that image come to this area, to the lower torso in particular, and maybe even the upper belly. So if you imagine you're a pile of newspaper, it's raining, the print is running, And with each heavy drop of rain, the newspaper flattens a little bit more, sags, softens. Just see how that feels. Did the back relax a little bit? Are your bottom ribs a little closer to the floor? Did your pelvis just gently tilt? Mine did. And then the next image you can play with is imagining your pantsing. So right where the crease happens in your hips, imagine that softening and deepening. And then maybe you feel yourself take a deeper breath because you have a little more room in the back lungs. So you can stay here as long as you want. 1 minute up to 20 minutes, however long it takes to feel that releasing. So that's a nice one just to practice as a visualization and a meditation. If you don't have time for that, or just want to add on to that, you can really think about moving the hips through water, and I'll show you that exercise. So you bring your feet apart, knees are bent, you can have your hands behind you for support. Just let your knees come side to side just as far as it feels good. And think about your hip joint. It's a ball and socket joint. So the top of the thigh fits in to that joint like a ball and a socket. And if you imagine that the areas where it might be a little jammed up, if you think about some fluid moving into that area and softening, creating space, then you might feel that fluidity. You might feel less sticking or what's the word? Creaking, I think is the word. Yeah, so just go within your range. Whatever feels good. Okay, so that's one way to kind of get fluid moving in the hips. It's also nice for the inner thighs. Another way is to stir the pot. So you take hold of your foot, flex the foot, and just gently cradle first. Okay, just cradling the leg. And then to stir the pot, you just take that leg around in a clockwise direction. And then take it around in a counterclockwise position. So if you have really tight hamstrings or lower back and you find yourself like this, you might sit on a folded blanket or maybe even a small pillow to give yourself a little more room. So just notice, okay, where does it feel a little sticky? And then see if you can let more fluidity come in there. So that visualization of the water coming into that ball and socket joint actually relaxes the tight muscles. So it does allow for more fluid to move into that area. It's not so jammed up. So it's very practical. So you're taking your leg around in clockwise direction, counterclockwise direction. You can even take it in all kinds of directions, but again, you don't want to, the idea is not so much to stretch as it is to loosen up, or as I like to say, juice up. Okay, so those are a couple nice ones. I'll show you one more, which is for the hip flexors. So it includes the psoas that we just talked about, but it also includes some of the muscles around here, and maybe even your inner thighs. So you can start on your knees, And a couple of variations with your feet. You can have your toes flat on the floor, or you can have your toes curled. And if your feet cramp up, I'll show you a different variation as well. But all you're going to do is come onto your knees and tuck the tailbone under. So I have very tight hip flexors, so I have to really think about relaxing my lower back and letting my tailbone drop down. And then I pull my pubic bone up towards my ribs. Okay, so if you feel a lot of tightness in the lower back, don't push it. You don't have to like jam your hips forward, but just imagine lengthening. So lengthening from the knees up through the front of the body. And so by moving instead of trying to hold this position, that's what helps create that fluidity again. So each time you come up, the muscle, it understands what you're trying to do, and it allows itself to get into it a little bit more. Okay, so if that variation just not happy for the knees or the feet, you can do it on your back as well. So this is the bridge. I actually find this is a little more stressful in the lower back, but that's just me and my choice. So you could do one or the other or both. Very, very happy hip flexors from that. So I encourage you through the cleanse to get up from your desk as often as you can and move around, and maybe adding some of these kinds of movements in for the hips would be really helpful. Because that is one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of is just a lot of havoc being reaped in the hips, and it's showing up in lower back pain, it's showing up as sciatica, showing up as knee problems. So before I get on my soapbox, I'll just say during the cleanse, make sure you get up, move your hips around, even if it's just, a side-to-side sway. That will be really helpful. And just use that image of the Epsom salt bath or the ocean just to bring some more fluidity into those joints. And if you have any questions about these exercises or would like some more suggestions for movements for the hips or anything else that you might be experiencing in the cleanse, please email me. You can email me at jyoung@spitfirefitnessarts.com.